Okay, so this is the VC panel, and who remembers that line from, what was that Tom Cruise movie where he was the agent and show me the money, right? So we're going to figure out how to show me the money here, okay, guys? So first of all, we're going to do quick intros. I'll start down there with Grant, and we'll go this way.
Sure, Grant, hot mic. Grant Allen, I'm Managing Director with ABB Technology Ventures. We're the corporate venture arm of ABB Group. If you haven't heard of ABB, we're a $40 billion power and automation company based in Switzerland. So we actually make a lot of distributed control system, ICS gear, power products, power systems, robotics, and other industrial gear that is increasingly getting smarter, increasingly connected, and increasingly going to be serving up analytics and services to our customers.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ankur Prakash. I am Vice President of Investments at Liberty Global. Liberty Global is the largest cable operator outside of North America. So we have operations in Europe and in Latin America. The easiest way to think of us is that we're like the Comcast of Europe or the Time Warner of Europe. So we're a cable operator. We're across 12 countries. We don't operate under the Liberty Global is an umbrella brand, so we operate under local brands within different markets. And I work for the corporate investment group. Our charter is really to find innovative technologies and products that are strategic to our business and our industry. And basically, after we make an investment, what we try to do is try to take the company into our markets in Europe in the next 2 to 3 years down the road. So that's how we typically look at investments. It's a broad category. IoT becomes an important one. We have relationships with our customers, our business customers as well. So bringing connected devices to them and connected experience is always something that we look to do.
Cool.
Yeah, hi, Ajay Chopra with Trinity Ventures. We are a Sandal Road venture fund, manage about $1 billion. So we invest fairly broadly across both consumer ecosystems and enterprise ecosystems. We were in Fitbit, Avak, and also from a sort of back-end support for IoT, a company called InfluxDB, which sort of manages the real-time database for large amounts of data that comes typically from IoT devices. Very excited to be here.
Great. And I'm Mario Lorenzo. I'm a partner at Kilpatrick Townsend. We're an international law firm that does everything for businesses. I see several clients out there and many, many more potential clients. So my personal specialty is I'm a corporate guy. I work with companies to get them started, funded, introduced to VCs, help them avoid pitfalls, et cetera. So real quick admin process here. Everyone's downloaded the app, right? The TiEcon app? Yes, everyone's nodding heads, great. So Q&A is going to be a big part of this because we don't want to just be up here talking to ourselves. We want to be hearing from you. So please go on to your app and upload some questions for these folks if I don't cover those questions myself. So without further ado, the first question goes to AJ. In what type of IoT companies were investors investing 2 years ago, and what's different about it now? So Gartner recently identified the top 10 IoT technologies for the next couple years, including security, analytics, processors, operating systems. What were folks investing in last year, and what are you guys investing in now?
Yeah, so I think if you look at the evolution of IT, if I can go back for a second, even beyond the 2 years time frame, in the early days, it was cameras. So Dropcam was one of the first ones to come into that space. And we had a position in a company called Avak then. And then you saw actually a bunch of picture frames that were connected to both send information and collect information back and forth. And then the system sort of evolved towards more towards health and fitness with Fitbit and such. And then towards media and entertainment through, if you look at things like Roku or Chromecast, they're basically IoT devices of sorts. And they're collecting a lot of information and data about usage behavior and such of end customers. I think in the more recent past, August has done really well. You saw a locking company earlier. I think August was invested in probably a couple of years ago. Peloton, which is not the Peloton that presented here earlier, which is a great trucking company, but the bicycle company that we can actually get video classes in your home to exercise with is actually doing incredibly well. It's a connected exercise workout company. I think more recently we are seeing some interesting Now that the backend systems are robust enough to collect large amounts of data, we're seeing some consumer applications in healthcare, as was mentioned earlier. There's a company called FeverScan, which is for children's fever monitoring, so you can monitor their temperature on a continuous basis all times and set alarms and such. That's very interesting to us. And other monitoring of personal health and well-being is very exciting. We have seen some interesting devices that are for mindfulness to get your minds calming, which we think is kind of like a new interesting area that we are looking at fairly carefully. And then I think if you look at the professional side, manufacturing I think is really spending a ton of money in instrumenting everything and measuring that. And infrastructure in particular is going to get very exciting. I think there was some discussion about that earlier, where you can put sensors on almost everything, bridges, roads, not just to get metrics on what's happening on them, but what's happening in them. So you can forecast failures and fractures and such, which I think is very exciting.
Very cool. Grant, do you have anything?
I think that was actually a fairly good history of the IoT world. I mean, I think we went from looking at connecting a bunch of little cheap things to actually getting into hairier problems where you're actually looking at lots of sensors, advanced telemetry in gear that was previously not connected to the internet. So I think we're entering a new world of IoT that I think has a lot more value potential. I mean, Fitbit was obviously a fantastic outcome. There have been some other ones, Nest and Dropcam were good exits. But I think we'll be seeing more companies like Jasper, that were actually really fantastic outcomes. But going after broader comms problems, broader security problems, and then some of these vertical specific applications, like Greg Papadopoulos. I don't know if any of you were in that talk earlier at 145. He was talking about, go after the high density dollar per cubic meters problems. And you're going to see a lot in manufacturing. You're going to see a lot in places potentially like ag, where you might want to telemetrize your expensive vineyard up in the valley. Or I think he threw up there a picture of a baby, because these are priceless things that you want to collect data on. And I think that's something that's probably more about the application than it is a technology problem. For instance, we have an Owlette device for my child, and that is in theory an IoT device, but this is a smart booty that you put on your newborn. And for infants, it actually uses pulse oximetry to measure the blood saturation. And so if it drops, you get an alert. But from a technology comms perspective, it's not that tough of a problem. From an app usage execution perspective, it's a terrifically tough problem, because right now it's pretty kludgy and it goes off at all hours of the night. It's a huge pain in the butt to use, so we stop using it. Just like we have about 4 different health bands sitting in our door, because after a while you give up on them because they ultimately don't really add any value to my life whatsoever.
So I think, just maybe a couple of things to add to that. From Liberty's point of view as a service provider, we think we've seen a lot of investments going in on verticalized applications, end-to-end full-stack companies, Nest, Dropcam, good examples of that. Now we're also seeing investments in, broader horizontal categories. So, like Jasper, you mentioned, we think connecting devices to the network is still not as sort of user-friendly as we think it should be. Yeah, it's not as robust. I mean, even today, I have a Dropcam at home, but I consider myself fairly techie, but it still took me like 15 minutes to, get the thing connected and get it set up across like the 3 devices we have. And I think for mass adoption, you need to simplify a lot of that for the end consumer. So we're seeing a lot of investments going on in that. We as Liberty itself is putting in some effort to do that, but clearly outside of Liberty, we're seeing stuff happen in that area as well. Yeah.
Ajay, you were an early investor in Fitbit, so what are you seeing as the most interesting use cases and value chains now?
Yes. Are you thinking of in that category, or
in wearables, or all
yeah.
categories?
Yeah,
sure.
Wearables have, since the Fitbit era, wearables have taken a giant leap, and embedded in clothing, embedded in shoes, embedded in whistle for dogs, all kinds of stuff. So, so I think that trend has sort of, in our opinion, sort of played out, right? Sure. And we think that And there were lots of issues, by the way, with Fitbit because the amount of data that was coming from each individual user was just too enormous for them to actually handle, and they had to do sampling, as you know. I think with what Amazon has released at the back end and what Google is doing, and I think we're glad to hear what IBM is doing in the earlier session, and with the time series databases like InfluxDB and such, the handling of that data and then more importantly analyzing the data is very exciting. So, we are looking at the back-end opportunities more robustly. We think that if you think about Fitbit, if you think about the key elements of IoT, right, they're essentially four. So you have the sensors. There's going to be a whole variety of them. And there's going to be tons of innovation in that area. And it's going to be worldwide. Then you have the processing of some level because there has to be a simple compute unit or maybe a complex compute unit nearby these sensors, right? And then you have connectivity, and it can be a variety of different types. And then there's going to be a host amount of software on top of that. And so that's with the device. And then beyond that, you're going to see all the back end. So we're seeing a lot of opportunities in the back end in dealing with data, analyzing it, correlating it, making sense out of it, right? So that's where we see a ton of opportunity.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess on the use cases, I think on the consumer side, I personally think that the good use cases are still to come. I think we've seen a lot of, good, locks are there, and there's obviously drop cams in the world. But I still think that the power of, when we talk about like billions of devices, I think the power of that will come into play when we start solving problems that are, just more than nice to have problems. I think one of the key things that is missing in IoT today is there's lack of interconnectivity between devices, and that opens up a host of other applications that you can run on top of it. So I think from a consumer standpoint, I feel that there is a lot of use cases and a lot of potential in the market that is yet to come. On the industrial side and on the business side, I think absolutely. I mean, manufacturing, retail, healthcare. I mean, those are some huge use cases I think that are already starting to take shape. But on the direct-to-consumer side, I think there's just a lot more potential.
So Grant, you mentioned a bunch of fitness devices that you leave in the drawer now. Have you seen a company that has the really good stickiness that continues to be relevant on the consumer side, consumer-facing side first, but then also that has thought through the back-end data piece really well so that they know what they're doing with that data and put that in the business
best example
plan?
that comes to mind is Nest. I mean, it's a tremendously sticky product because how often do you upgrade your thermostats? It's kind of the leader. The Echo Bee is probably the number 2 in that space. But I mean, they've done an elegant job with a great thermostat, and it works very nicely with my Protect and my 2 drop cams that I have in the 2 nurseries. And in terms of the service, I hate their pricing model. It's terrible. But overall, that is a very sticky product that I think has hit home for that consumer application. Whole different issue, though, that Nest has been unable to put out any other new products, and I think they have their own internal issues they're going through right now. But that's a whole different panel, I think.
Right, exactly. I think maybe the 3 favorite things that I'm using right now, and I don't know. I think they're all sticky. I would say Amazon Echo is my top of the list, and then I think Peloton Bike, which I think is enormously. It's very, very sticky, right? So once you get into the habit of working out on it, and you're actually interacting with the real-time class that's happening in real time, and you're one of the participants, and actually the instructor can call on you, right, while you're at your home. So that's very sticky, right? And
a little creepy.
And then I think just recently I bought, there's a company called Blue Smart. We're not investors, so I'm not promoting them. They actually have a carry-on suitcase that is IoT. And it's got 3 really interesting capabilities. Firstly, obviously you can geo-track it, so you know where it is at all times. And then it's also got this capability when you lift it up, on your phone it tells you how heavy it is. So you know that you're within restrictions of travel, whatever, right? So, but the coolest thing actually is not related to IoT. It's got a big battery in it, so you can charge your cell phone off it. So that's pretty cool. So those are the 3 that I'm like really enjoying right now. So yeah, and I think Peloton has really taken off. Amazon Echo obviously is like really taken off, so it's very sticky. So, and I think Echo has become a platform, which is kind of like a new thing, I would imagine, where people are now developing applications on top of it. So there's an alarm company that I just read about that has actually developed an application where you can actually, through the mobile phone for Alexa, which is the application for Echo, you can actually send a message to Echo, and it can say, turn the alarm on, and this alarm.com can actually then send the notification and make all the right noises to scare off the burglar. So I thought that's kind of interesting that there's a platform developing on top of Echo. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I use the Echo. I guess one other thing that I really like is the Ring product. And again, we're not investors in them, but I think they've done a fantastic job. Again, it's one of those products that is vertically isolated. It's an end-to-end product. It's hard to sort of fit it into the Nest platform ecosystem right now. I wish the Nest platform could expand into so many different other products, but that's where I think from a consumer experience standpoint, there's a lot yet to be delivered in this space, where there are great products, but very siloed, very individualistic right now.
We heard earlier that Gartner predicts 35 trillion market cap for this industry by 2020. And they also predicted that more than half of that market is going to be accessed by companies that have not existed currently. So for all the entrepreneurs out there thinking about starting an IoT business, what is it that's different about an IoT business from other kinds of businesses, Grant?
What is different about an IoT business? For us, IoT is very fundamentally different from the other companies we're investing through my group. And we're a corporate captive strategic fund. We have a $200 million balance sheet allocation. But a lot of what we do are point solutions within the overall portfolio that dotted line back to something ABB likes or needs to be in the future. But IoT is something that truly cuts across so much of our stuff. Because for makers of hardware like ABB, like GE, like Siemens, like Schneider, like all these companies, you're going to have to wrap zeros and ones around what you're already selling. And that process of digitization is very, very tough for large companies who, like ABB, have been making hardware since the 1800s. GE is, to much fanfare, put out this Predix platform. It still has a ways to go, but I give them a lot of credit for leading the charge and kind of cutting through the wind for the rest of us, like Siemens, like ABB, who are trying to digitize their assets and move from break-fix to ongoing service revenue to actually generating efficiency and new sources of revenue, rather than just reducing cost for these large, expensive, often rotating pieces of equipment in the field. So again, I mean, you're dealing with so many different problems that it actually is a pretty gnarly thing for a startup to go in and do a truly IoT. And we're not talking about putting a sensor on your dog bowl and ordering new dog food, or doing some new widget that pings Amazon. I mean, that's cool, and that will be, I'm sure, a part of all of our lives once they figure out the interoperability. But for these really hairy industrial problems where we're trying to securely connect thousands of real-time sensors to do current voltage waveform coming off our motors and do real-time predictive analytics at the edge, I mean, we have a ways to go. And I think we're going to have to solve interoperability and standards. We're going to have to solve the communications protocols. We're going to have to solve the energy and kind of the power issue, because it isn't just about making a smaller, longer-lasting battery. We're going to have to get into better forms of energy harvesting and other things to make these sensors work. And we're doing it. It's just taking a while. We just rolled out at Hannover Messe in Germany a $50 sensor that is basically a lick and stick sensor with BLE to take data off of our motors. And we're the largest maker of NEMA motors in the world. We acquired Baldor for, I think, $3.6 billion. But we need to extract data from these devices and be able to offer services to our customers. So if things are about to break, we can tell them. And right now, it's a very simple red light, green light, yellow light. But you can see where this is all going. Once we solve that sensor problem, the data acquisition and communications problem, we'll be able to roll out services in the cloud and eventually do more advanced things at the edge. So,
gotcha.
Still early days there.
Following up on that, Ankur, so is B2C a more interesting space than B2B for you guys and the things you're investing in?
Well, I should say B2C is more, 80% of our business is B2C. So naturally, the easiest way to go and try to solve a problem for us is to offer it to our residential customers. But we're looking at B2B applications as well. And, I think I think there is a lot that can be done today on B2B. Like I said, I mean, on manufacturing, retail, there's just a lot that is already being done, and there's a lot of potential for investment, I think, good investments in that space. But we're looking at B2C applications as well. I think where we end up investing and looking more is more so on the connectivity side. So like you said, there's a sensor layer, there's connectivity, there's applications. I think we're focusing a lot more on the connectivity side, just trying to provide a better seamless connectivity to these devices, whether it's interoperability, just seamless connectivity for the consumer. So that's where we typically focus on, yeah.
Gotcha. So one thing that kind of cuts across B2B to B2C is IoT security. So AJ, what are you thinking about IoT security and standardization of security issues and some opportunities for entrepreneurs to get involved in that business sector?
Yeah, let me just come to that. I want to make a couple of comments on the prior question just to see if I can be helpful. I think that on the B2B side, understanding the vertical is really, really important. And I think because a lot of these technologies will be commoditized, including the layers that you were talking about will be commoditized. People that come from the vertical, so let's say if it's agriculture, or if it's in automobile manufacturing or engines like ABB, they will have an advantage because they will understand what the customer needs are. So I would say if you're trying to do a B2B type of a play with IoT, make sure you have a co-founder or maybe have your own knowledge to make sure you have that. On the B2C side, the challenge is different because let's say if you're doing a mobile app, right? You just need to understand the iOS operating system or the Google Android and get done with it, right? But if you're doing an IoT play, you need to understand hardware and software, you need to understand connectivity, you need to understand APIs, you need to understand UX and UI.
Distribution channels.
And then you have the mobile app on top of that, right? And so I think, what I would ask you as entrepreneurs to think about is, if you're going into the B2C world, think about the business model alongside all of that technical development, because if it's like a one and done business model, it's really hard. And I think Fitbit sort of got caught up with that later in their life as they scaled, frankly. And I think, to get a more repeatable business model, I think like Peloton type of stuff is really interesting, or something that has a repeatable use case is much more interesting, so you can have a recurring revenue stream. So just think about that for a little bit. Now, regarding security, and I think I've taken a little bit of time, I'll hand this over. It's a very, very key area. I believe that there will be standardization on that layer. I think data privacy is going to be key to almost everything that, through the entire spectrum of IoT, whether it is B2B or B2C, especially when you're looking at public data and adoption by cities or adoption by industries. That's going to be extremely key. And so I think there will be standardization on those layers. I think outside of those layers, I am actually not a big believer in standardization. I think innovation is hampered by standardization, frankly, especially in the early years of evolution of this industry. And the other thing I would say is I think in 5 years, we probably will not be talking about IoT. I think it'll be sort of like when the internet industry first happened, everybody talked about the internet. And now we talk about different verticals and applications. So I think sensors and connectivity will be in everything. And it'll be really the use cases, whether they're B2B or B2C, that people will be talking about by verticals.
Yeah, I think on the standards question, I mean, I agree. I think as an entrepreneur, I think you probably don't want to wait for standards and stuff. I mean, standards are going to take a long time. But I do think that standards are going to be important for the industry, because this is one of those sort of mega trends that has so many constituents. I mean, large companies like Liberty, ABB, we're all part of this. And it's just that to get larger companies to move, unless there is some standards defined, it's just hard for them to move. So I think as an entrepreneur, you probably have to put that aside and try to see how you can solve, point problems, get innovation out there. And but eventually, I think but you have to obviously keep monitoring the standards. But I think the standards eventually are going to evolve, and I think the standards are probably going to help mass adoption of IoT across at least the consumer space. I think it's going to unify the consumer experience to some extent, I feel, but it's going to take its own time. Standards are not innovative. I mean, innovation is sort of the unstandard way of doing things, right? It's disruptive, yeah.
So real quick on standards, Grant. So UL came out with their standard 2900 on cybersecurity. It's sort of a green light, red light thing. You mentioned that as part of the dashboard for one of your sensors, so it reminded me of this. Is that a better way of doing standards or a better way of entrepreneurs thinking about standards, or would it be better for them to be thinking about disclosure against specific metrics? Are we good at this, that, and the other thing versus green, red light?
I'm probably more in the school of thought that the standards will work themselves out. I mean, we just heard the mayor of San Jose talking about rolling out a smart cities network based on Silver Spring, and it's RF mesh technology that's been out for a long, long time. Yeah. And there's a lot better ways to connect stuff in a city, frankly. So I think you kind of just got to pick your technology and go with it, and then have the ability to pivot if you need to. But I do think that they'll generally work themselves out. You'll see more standards for security come out, and I really do think there's two major takeaways. Have vertical focus and expertise, so that you actually know if you're doing an IoT application for motors and drives, you have to work with the companies who are making motors and drives and know what a failure mode looks like in those pieces of equipment. We see so many analytics companies coming to us saying, we'll just suck in all your data and tell you what's going to happen. That doesn't work. We have very specific algorithms in place already for our transformers, for our robots, for our drives, and so I think you need to have at least a core chunk of your team coming from that industry. And I think beyond that, just having adaptability as things mature will be key.
So I've skimmed, I'm connected now, sorry about that, and I've skimmed through this, and I think we talked about a lot of things, security, some of the partnerships that the folks had here. One of the topic areas we did not discuss are exits and funding, and I know that the new rules from the SEC regarding crowdfunding are coming up. Would you guys like to chat real briefly about the impact of non-accredited investors in funding issues and how that might impact future exits for startups? And or your investment in those companies?
Yeah, I mean, we are fans of these new regulations. I think the more capital that comes into the entrepreneurial ecosystem, the better. I think crowdfunding is great. We have looked at a lot of companies that have done crowdfunding before coming to venture capital. So it's another form of seed funding or an extension seed funding. And what's neat about it is that you're not giving up any equity, right? So you're essentially borrowing money from your customers. Because you're.
But the new rules are about equity crowdfunding as opposed to doing the
you're talking
Kickstarter
about that's
thing.
right. You're right. So that's true. Yeah. So they can be equity crowdfunding, or you can do crowdfunding against a product. I think both of them are very positive developments, and I don't think there's an impact on an exit because these typically happen very early in the life cycle of the companies. Okay. We have not seen any impact of that. We don't intend to see any impact of that on the VC ecosystem. There's $36 billion pouring into the VC ecosystem every year, and about 70% is being deployed within 100 miles of here, okay? So it's like, by the time crowdfunding catches up to that at $10,000 or whatever it is per individual, I think it's going to be a long time. And I think a lot of those people will actually become part of the ecosystem, right? So we welcome that. I think it's a very positive trend.
My only advice would be don't muddy up your cap table too much. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can do it a little bit more elegant. Absolutely. Where you can wrap up an SPV with, a certain number of investors through there, maybe use angel lists so you have a vehicle that's got power of attorney and can move quickly. I do a lot of angel investing too, and if I see too many cats and dogs in the cap table, you kind of do run the other way, and most Series A credible VCs would as well. But on the other side of the coin, I personally see a lot of these fantastic connected devices that are going through online crowdfunding, and it's a great way to test your market, optimize your product. If you have a new cool connected skateboard, I'm sure it's like a pretty good way to get a lot of those sold up front and cover your initial run of product.
Cool. Thanks. I see the red lights blinking, so that means we're out of time, but thanks to everybody. If you thank our panelists, please.